I fucking hate mushrooms. Hi, hello, how's it going? It's Lo. I tried to go for a 1950s kind of vibe with the look and the makeup. I literally Googled 1950s makeup. Not my best work. Not my best work, I have to admit. But I'm not sure if you can tell, by the clothes and the makeup and the, sad attempt I did, that today we're talking about a book that is set in the 1950s, and that book is called Mexican Gothic. O que foi? Eu vou falar de filme de terror, você quer assistir? Everyone and their mothers has been talking about Mexican Gothic for the past couple of months. The book came out on the 30th of June 2020, but the hype was high even before the book came out, and I knew I had to get my hands into it. I was so hyped up for this book, and I have opinions about it. I have many opinions about it. I'm just winging it. I thought about this book so much in the past few days that I'm just gonna hurl all of my thoughts to the camera, and I'm gonna pray that it makes sense. This video will be split into a review part, which will have no spoilers, and then a discussion part, which I will actually go deep into the mindfuckery that is Mexican Gothic. Mexican Gothic is set in the 1950s Mexico and follows Noemi Taboada as she receives a very strange letter from her cousin. The story begins with Noemi being pulled out of a party by her father, and she's pretty pissed about it because she's a socialite and, she lives for the social events in 1950s Mexico City. But then her father hands her a very strange letter from her cousin Catalina, and in the letter her cousin is saying that her husband is trying to murder her by poisoning and that she needs to go visit her in the high place as fast as she could. Noemi has a pretty close relationship with Catalina and she's very fond of her cousin, and then she decides to go and visit her cousin back in where she's living to make sure that she's being treated fairly, and if it's the case, trying to find her some psychiatric treatment. Catalina has recently married a man called Virgil Doyle, and it was a pretty hasty marriage that left a sour taste in the mouth of the very conservative, very concerned with keeping up appearances family that are the Taboadas. Noemi then gets very concerned with her cousin and decides to go and visit her at this place where she lives called the High Place. And when she gets there, things get really weird. Things get really weird. This book was marketed as a horror book, and it definitely fits the genre. This is a book that will make you feel things, and the most that it made me feel was that I was once a mushroom lover. I hate it. I shall not eat another mushroom again in my entire life. I'm not. No, nope. If you have not yet read Mexican Gothic, if you are reading it but still are not finished, and if you don't like spoilers, I suggest you skip to the timestamp that I'm going to put in the description below so you can see my final thoughts about the book without spoiling you. But if you are a person who read this book and you're still wondering what the then, boy, do I have things I want to talk about with you. I have a whole list of things I want to talk about and discuss. Let's start with the positives of the book. The first thing that I absolutely loved about this book is Sylvia Moreno-Garcia's writing style. Her writing is beautiful. The way that she constructs the stories, like every other sentence I found myself just pondering on how beautiful it looked, and how she is able to work the words to really create this world that has a lot of depth to it. Still on the topic of her writing, I absolutely adored all of the references that she made in this book. There is this point in the book where she mentions the Habsburg jaw, and the Habsburg jaw is a severe form of jaw abnormality that was very common in the Habsburg royal family in Europe because they were so inbred that their family tree was a bamboo. Incest led to some weird shit, and that was said just right before she figured out that the Doyles were also into inbreeding and incest, which is wild. I think that the way that she lays down the references in the book and the way that she uses references as a plot point and as metaphors to explain the plot even further are just top-notch, amazing. I absolutely loved her style, and because I loved her style so much, I will look into more books that she has written. She has written Gods of Jade and Shadow. I am going to read that because apparently Gods of Jade and Shadow talk about the god of death and a mortal girl. As we've established in this channel, a sucker for that. Anyway, back to Mexican Gothic. Besides the Habsburg jaw one, I really love when she mentioned Jung and Freud and psychoanalysis, because we've also established in this channel that I am a psychoanalysis bitch. I love psychoanalysis. I will read anything that has some psychoanalytic theory in it. So when she mentions Freud, I'm like, ooh, this is going to be good. After I was done with this book, I actually went back to all of my school work and I just like made notes about the relationships between psychoanalysis, subjectivity, and the people in Mexican Gothic and the characters in Mexican Gothic. It was really interesting because while I was reading Mexican Gothic, I was also reading some academic stuff that I actually needed to go through. And I was reading this one part of Psychic Life of Power that Judith Butler actually says that we would rather be recognized in ways that are harmful for us than not to be recognized at all. We would rather have a place in the world than not have a place at all, even if that place in the world means that we're constantly being hurt. This for me was so interesting because it's Francis's entire character arc in the book, because he is literally so attached to that way of life that he knows that is completely harmful for him, but at the same time letting go means facing the complete uncertainty of the world outside that he has never really seen. The interesting part is that it's an impossibility. He can't even imagine a life where he is not living in that place with those people, with that gloom, and living in that position. It says a lot about a book that as soon as I'm done with it, the first thing that I think is, oh my god, I want to write a paper about this. Honest to God, when I do my PhD applications by the end of the year, this is going to be my writing sample. I swear to you, I have like 15 pages of paper written already about this one book. Because like the possibilities of analysis and the parallels that you can draw, just because Sylvia Moreno-Garcia is so spot on with her references throughout the whole book. And the writing just gives you so much to think about and so much to ponder about, and how the entire book is an allegory for many things. Also, speaking of, themes and parallels and metaphors, the idea of exploitation as rot.
Oh, chills. Literal chills.
Okay, let me explain where I'm coming from. Basically, there's this one part in the book where Noemi goes into the city and she wants to know a little bit more about the house and the people because everyone is super fucking weird. And as a good Latina, she sees all of that going on and she says, what the fuck? So she goes into the city to try to find more answers, and she goes to this herbal healer and etc. And they start talking a little bit about the house and the Doyles and everything that happened, and she gives a little bit of backstory that the Doyles came into that region of Mexico because they were drawn by a silver mine that existed in the place, and they had a whole lot of fortune with it, but eventually the mine ran dry and the fortune went away with it, but they still stayed there. By the way, if you're watching this and you're English, I am sorry, but I don't think that there's anything more English than going to a place that doesn't belong to you, bleeding that place dry, then standing on top of its corpse, like watching the desiccated body just squirm into nothingness, refuse to let go, and still manage to talk shit about it, which, it's a very English thing, and, the Doyles being English, I just felt it was really good. At a certain point, they have this dialogue. It all sounds tragic, Noemi said, but I'm not sure I would call it a curse. You would call it coincidence, wouldn't you? Yes, I suppose you would. But the fact is that everything they touch rots. And that for me was so interesting. I was like, dude, just hear me out. The woman in the village is like Mexico, right? And she's like the traditional Mexican knowledge and healer type of wisdom. And she is the land before they came. She represents what was before, right? And the Doyles, like, bear with me, and the Doyles are like colonialism because they come and everything they touch rots. I love that parallel so much. I was like, oh boy, oh shit. And I tell you that I was mind blown like several ways throughout this book. I am not kidding. Like, this book has so much that I could talk about. Like, oh my god. colonialism as rot, and then the curse is actually mold, and mold is just something that comes when things are unkempt, when, you know, things are decomposing, when there's death. So like the exploitators, they bring back death. Am I tripping? I feel like I'm tripping. I wasn't even high and that made sense. I wasn't even high and it made sense. I feel like that one literature teacher that just looks far too much into the reading material and you're like, dude, it's really not that deep. But it really feels really deep. Man, There is this one point in the book where she mentions the death drive. Now, if you're not familiar with psychoanalysis, the death drive is what Freud calls the impulse that we as human beings feel towards things that can destroy us. The clearest example of death drive is when you go to the edge of a cliff or to the edge of a very high building and you feel that impulse to jump. Of course, the book is set in the 1950s, so she wouldn't have access to this sort of material. But what she calls the death drive, I would like to call abjection. Abjection is a theme that was worked through scholarly academic work, but it's mostly known for being an integral part of Julia Kristeva's The Powers of Horror, an essay on abjection. The reason why I'm looking so much into this, and I'm drawing a little bit from Julia Kristeva's Power of Horror. And basically, Julia Kristeva says that we have a personality and we have a subjectivity. But outside of this subjectivity, there is something that we call abjection. And abjection is that which reminds me that the border between my life and my non-existence are way too thin for our liking. Like everything that can remind you of your shortcomings as a human, like the fact that you have bowel movements, that you have excrements and you have to expel that from within your body, that you produce body sweat, and the fact that you will die. So all of those things that evoke a feeling of fear, horror, or disgust, or just like that visceral feeling of recoiling from something that we know is just too wrong, but we're kind of drawn to it at the same time. That is the abject. Horror is the language of the abject, according to Julia Kristeva. And one thing that Mexican Gothic does, and it does incredibly well, is to frame the exploitators as the abject. Frame the exploitators as what is wrong. Horrifying aren't the native Mexican practices and the native Mexican indigenous tribes. Horrifying aren't the practices of people in the global south who have to do the unthinkable in order to survive another day. Horrifying aren't the uncivilized practices of civilizations where Western thought hasn't arrived yet. That is not horrifying. Horrifying is walking into a place that doesn't belong to you, taking it, and then thinking that you are its righteous leader. That is horrifying. Colonization is the abject. And even though I might be looking a lot into it, the fact that Sylvia Moreno-Garcia put so much emphasis in the psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic references throughout this book just give me that inch that I needed to kind of grasp into it and be like, oh, we could do so many beautiful things with it. Yeah, I'm not even sure where I'm going with this. I'm just like, I am in love with the idea of colonialism as a rot. Basically, to sum up the positives that I found in Mexican Gothic. Number one, the writing is absolutely beautiful. Sylvia Moreno-Garcia is truly a master of her craft. All of the chapters are written so well. The descriptions of places and people is just so beautiful. The way that she can convey the sense of uneasiness just with her words is masterful. Honest to God, one of the best writers that I've had the pleasure of reading in this year and in a long time. To be fair, in a very long time. The second one draws a little bit from the first one, but her references in the book and the use that she makes of images and referentiating historical events to create this setting is amazing. I love myself a good reference story. I love myself a good reference heavy plot. I love thinking that I'm so smart when I pick up a reference and I'm like, oh my god, I understood that, I got that. The third point draws a little bit from the second and from the first, but the way that she writes manages to spike up some really interesting and deep conversations that can be had about, one, our feelings as people and wanting to find some compliance and wanting to fit into places and not worrying too much about things, or just feeling like we want to hand over our own free will because it would be easier to live our lives that way if we didn't have to question ourselves all the time. But on the other hand, pointing that sense of compliance, that need to be passive, that need to bend down on your knee and accept whatever is given as a part of exploitation, and exploitation itself being portrayed as a rot, was masterful. It was masterful. It was genius. It was genius. Honest to God, I feel like every other day I start thinking about this book, because like the idea that colonialism is a rot, how many times have I said this throughout this video? I just feel like I said that many times. Fourth thing that I thought was a positive of this book spooked me. This book spooked me a lot. I was thoroughly spooked by this book. It just made that sense of uneasiness crawl through my skin, and I'm a sucker for that. So, you know, props to Sylvia Moreno-Garcia, again, because her writing is so beautiful. I feel like this is incredible. Now, on to the negatives. I feel like Noemi is a very resourceful character from the get-go. It is shown that Noemi is a very smart girl and that she pays a lot of attention to her surroundings. She's very observant. And there are a lot of things in the book that were placed to show that she was a very resourceful and very intelligent person. The first thing that I can think of is that she is very intimate with her father's business of dyes and paints. So she knows a lot about that. And also she carries this book around talking about witchcraft in pre-colonial Mexico and, you know, what the native indigenous tribes practices were. Also, Noemi has indigenous heritage in this book, which is amazing to really set the character. Noemi is an amazing main character, but I do feel like this wasn't really explored much in the book, and this actually follows with another thing. I'm not sure if this is something that is on me because I went into this book with the wrong perspectives, or if I went into this book thinking that it would do something that it wasn't really setting out to do. I really love the idea of having foreigners in the land and having that portrayed as what's horrifying, but I really wish that Noemi's indigenous heritage, also her resourcefulness, was more explored to actually wrap up the resolution of the book. Noemi is a very intelligent and resourceful character, like I said, but at the tail end of the book, I feel like she relied on Frances like way too much, and I feel like she had so much at her disposal that she could use to actually get herself out of the situation that she found herself in. And I do feel like if Sylvia Moreno-Garcia went through that direction, it would tie up really well with the theme of colonialism as rot. Because colonialism might be rot, but what would save it would be the actual natural resources of the land, the traditional knowledge that the people of this land had, and just the resourcefulness of this people that the Doyle family would look down upon, which is Mexicans. I think that this could have been explored a little bit better. Of course, there was the herbal medicine that the woman produced back in the village, and that was able to cut through the fog that the gloom created, but I don't think that this was exploited well enough, and I would love to see that and that whole imagery go deeper. One thing about horror stories that is important for us to take in mind is that we write horror stories to deal with real life things that we cannot deal with otherwise. They're just too horrifying, too dangerous, too painful for us to deal normally. And we turn to horror and we talk in allegories in order to process those things that are way too horrifying for us to actually face head on. And I do like that there is a subversion of the trope, but I feel like the subversion of the trope wasn't really completed. It could have gone a lot deeper if Noemi's resourcefulness and also her heritage were more integral to the resolution of the plot. Another thing that I thought wasn't really developed was the whole white supremacy plot. As soon as Noemi gets into the house, it's very clear, surprising grand total of 0 people, that they are a very racist bunch. And I kind of had a feeling that this was going to go somewhat towards a Get Out situation, like where this would be used as a plot device, but it really didn't really go anywhere, and it was just like kind of like to add to the fact that these were racist white people, which you didn't need to add the blatant racism for me to see them as racist white people. They are people who have been living in Mexico their entire lives and they don't bother speaking Spanish. Like, I got that. I got the picture. I feel like it was too much on the nose, and if it wasn't going to serve any plot purpose at all, I feel like it was something that could have been more subtle in the narrative. Another thing, it's not a bad thing. Maybe I'm too dumb. I don't know. I got a little confused. Who is Agnes? There is this one point in the book that the gloom shows Noemi how Doyle actually got the knowledge of the mushrooms and etc. And I get that, but he left that cave with the woman, but that woman wasn't Agnes. So where did he find that mushroom? Was that mushroom from Mexico? Because if the mushroom is from Mexico, that adds a whole other layer to colonialism as broad theme that it's going on. But if it's not from Mexico, where the fuck does the mushroom come from? I didn't get that part, and I reread it a couple of times. Maybe it's the language barrier, I don't know. If you understood that, please let me know in the comments. I was very confused, and I'm still confused, and every once in a while I will think about this book, and I will think like, this book is so great, and then I'll think like, man, who the fuck is Agnes? To sum up the negatives, the first thing is that I think that Noemi's character and resourcefulness wasn't as relevant and integral to the plot as I would expect and like her to. The second thing is that I feel like the natural resources of Mexico and the native knowledge of the people of Mexico would have been a far better way to bring the plot to a conclusion than what actually happened in the book, because it would make the theme of colonialism as wrought go full circle. The third thing is that I don't really understand the purpose of the white supremacy talk in the book. If the idea was to characterize the Doyles as racist white people, I think that there were more subtle ways for Sylvia Moreno-Garcia to do that. And that just was too much in your face. And if the white supremacy talk wasn't serving any specific point in the plot, I don't think that it was a necessary part of the book. Last but not least, fourth, who the fuck is Agnes? To sum it up, this review, I gave Mexican Gothic 4 out of 5 stars. I think this is a solid horror story, and I do think that if Sylvia Moreno-Garcia wants to write more horror in the future, she will just make me completely lose it. The potential is entirely there. Horror as a genre is a very difficult genre to pull off, I feel, and making sure that the story lands properly and the reader is thoroughly spooked by the story is incredibly difficult, and I do think that Sylvia Moreno-Garcia did an incredible job at it, but there were a couple of things that weren't as exploited as I would like in this book, and I feel like that just made me kind of mourn a little bit of the lost potential that this book could have been. But I will take so many amazing things from this book. Again, colonialism as wrought. I'm honest to God. Decolonial seal of approval here. Anyhow, this was my Mexican Gothic review. If you have read Mexican Gothic, please let me know in the comments below what you think, what were your thoughts. I just need to talk about Mexican Gothic with people because I can't stop thinking about this book. This book is like the goddamn mushrooms, okay? Just not leaving me. You know what the mushroom reminds me? There was this one episode of Hannibal that there was this one serial killer that just planted mushrooms all over people. That is abjection. That is abjection at its finest. Oh my god. Just thinking about it giving me the chills. God. Anyways, this is my review of Mexican Gothic. I would love to know what you think about it and this book in the description below. Let's talk a little bit because I need to talk about this book with people because I'm losing my goddamn mind here. That's the video for the day. I hope you guys enjoyed it and I'll see you next time.